room.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm Jackie Goldblum, and I'm so happy to put faces to some of the applicants that have been, some of the forms that have been coming into CWB. A little bit about myself. I just recently joined Classrooms Without Borders. I'm very excited. I was a teacher for 22 years, and I am seminars manager now. My background in teaching was Holocaust studies, Israel studies, and Jewish history. And so I'm very excited about this organization because I haven't left behind education. I'm going with the teachers now. So it's really nice for me. So a little bit about what my role is. I'm the seminars manager, as I said. So most of your communication will come through me. Most of the we have pre-seminar meetings, and these meetings are mandatory. Once you have been accepted, acceptance letters the first round of acceptance letters will come in through around the holidays, Thanksgiving holidays. So you should hear from us by then. And so the pre-seminar meetings are really important and mandatory because they're once a month, and we try to do them on a Sunday. They are going to be online, correct, Ellen?
I believe that is what we decided.
Yeah.
We may have the last one in May be in person, so we can pass out some of the swag things that we're going to give to you. So that the last one may be in person. We do always also record them. So, if there is, a real reason why you can't attend, you'll be able to watch that recording as well. And I think time-wise, we did hold this one early. We held it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Sundays, but I think that we've decided moving forward that our Marching Down Freedom's Road pre-study seminar would be at 4 p.m.
Right.
We have two other seminars, which are international seminars. And so inviting the scholars from the international seminars, it makes more sense for those to be earlier in the day.
So a little bit more about those pre-mandatory seminar meetings. The reason we're doing that is we want to have resources that are preparing you for more depth and understanding in areas that we are traveling to, and for the focus of the seminar as we travel. But also we want to create a sense of community amongst you, so you can support each other, collaborate, and come up with big ideas for yourselves with the community. The other things that you'll be hearing right away, and they're going to be time sensitive, so please make sure, when you get an email from me, open it up, because, we'll be starting with, well, not so much for Marching Down because we're going by bus this year. Other seminars overseas are with flights, but, rooming forms and the agreements that to do or complete a post-seminar project, forms that will be needed to be collected, such as insurance and a headshot, liability form, health form, allergies, and COVID vaccination requirements, in which we will go by CDC at the time. When we get closer, we'll always go by what's going on in the country. We never know what's going to happen around the corner, as we've learned in the last couple of years. So, and there will be a $250 deposit due upon acceptance, which holds your place on the seminar, because we do get applicants after this first round. There will be more applicants coming in. So, and then we have to know when to cap it. So, your first payment, and of course this is heavily subsidized this year. It's a wonderful trip, and for the teachers, but we have the first payment due in January and the second payment in February. Everything should be paid in full by March, and that's it about what you'll be hearing from me. That's everything. Any questions you have, anything that you might want to that's on your mind about the seminar, you know, please feel free to contact me. You may get something from Erica Fox Lubovsky, right? She is our operations manager, so she deals with payments and things. So if you see her name, she's part of us. She's, like I said, operations manager in the office. And Ellen knows everything that's going on. She's our educational outreach person, and she has really a good hand on what she's been in Classrooms Without Borders for a few years now. And I'd like to introduce you to Michael Naragon. He will be our scholar on this trip, along with, is it Kate, right? Kate's
Everybody pronounces your last name wrong, Kate, but
that's why I'm not.
Lukaszewicz. Did I get it right? Lukaszewicz?
Yes, Kate Lukaszewicz, thank you.
So if I can hand it over to Michael and Kate, that would be great. And let you introduce yourselves and let us know a little bit about.
Go ahead, Kate, you're unmuted.
Well, I've muted and unmuted like 3 times in that pause. So I started my Classrooms Without Borders story in 2016 when my head of school asked me if I wanted to travel to Poland, and I've traveled multiple times since then. And last year I was privileged enough to take the Marching Down Freedom's Road trip in February with a small cohort of teachers. And so I am pleased to go back this summer to provide logistical support so that you can all concentrate on learning, and Michael can concentrate on facilitating your learning as we all learn and grow together, exploring the South.
My turn. Great. My name is Mike Naragon, and I teach at Winchester Thurston School, and I'm in my 25th year of high school teaching. And I hold the mantle of being scholar with great care and hesitation, because I think we actually are a community of scholars that will learn from one another. We each bring our own little bits of expertise. Like I know, for example, Kate is going to open your eyes to new ways of looking at material when we're on there, because she's a very generous scholar and she has a vision about how to use this material well, not only in the classroom, but also in life. And I think that we would be poor if we don't solicit her views as well, as for all of us as well. So I'll be with you on the trip, and I'll also be nominally running the sessions that Jackie referred to earlier. And I'm pleased to meet you all. And there's someone in the waiting room, Ellen. You're muted.
I just let Elena in. I was just checking my email. There are a few people that didn't get the link, so we will be getting a few other people that will be joining us in the next couple minutes. So I can tell you a little bit about myself. Most of you know me or have had some type of communication with me. I've traveled with some of you on other study seminars. I'm Ellen Resnick, and I'm the Educational Programs and Outreach Manager. So Jackie, of course, is in charge of all things seminar, but we are a small organization. There's just the 4 of us, Jackie, myself, Erica, and Sippy, of course. So you may be getting communications from any of us, and please do open those up. As Jackie mentioned, many of them are timely in nature, so we appreciate you being able to respond quickly. As you know, or maybe you don't know, so I'm going to be telling you for the first time, Classrooms Without Borders is celebrating its 11th year this year. And the vision behind our organization is that we bring educators to places of history, have them walk that history along with scholars like Michael, Kate. We also have Samuel Black from the Heinz History Center who'll be joining us on this study seminar. Unfortunately, it looks like he was delayed in joining us today, but he will be joining us on the study seminar. We also visit contemporary sites. We look at the memorial sites, we go into the museum sites, we talk with the docents, we talk with the curators. We try our best to give you audience with contemporary witnesses so you can understand exactly what it was like for them during whatever time period of history. And of course, this is following the civil rights movement. One of the things that when Michael designed this study seminar, because he actually wrote this study seminar, worked very hard over, how many years would we say, Michael? Like 4 or 5 years?
It's 5 years.
5 years. So one of the things, of course, that is part of the vision is that when most people within the high school social studies curriculum teach about civil rights, it's very cursory, right? You teach about Rosa Parks, you teach about Martin Luther, and then you teach about signing of the Civil Rights Act. And of course, many more voices involved, and we want to amplify those voices. And we want to, as Jackie mentioned, dive deeper into the content. So Jackie, I think at this point, what we could do is we could open the PowerPoint with some of the images, and we could start from the slide, maybe from the first day. We don't need to go through the agenda and the introduction piece. Michael will be taking us through. So with that, Michael, the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. I'm so pleased that everybody's here today. And Ellen, let me know if I freeze up because I won't be able to tell. So I have my phone out. You can text me. Okay. We will start out by bus. This is our longest travel day. We will travel to Greensboro, North Carolina. And in Greensboro, we're going to use the place and space to really, I think, opened with two really interesting concepts, one of which is what is the actual nature of leadership within the civil rights movement itself? The Greensboro movement is where the student movement oftentimes is seen as starting, but we're going to turn that into a problem, of course, as we begin to study for this period. But essentially, February 1st, 1960 is when a lot of folks date the beginning of the student movement. We can quibble with that as we get to know each other. But essentially, it raised a fundamental question about where does leadership come from and what does leadership look like? But most importantly, what is it that students brought to the movement? And we'll trace that when we head off into Atlanta, as you'll see in just a little bit as well. But the other piece that we want to grapple with when we're in Greensboro is what does the past mean for us today? How does the past shape our present understandings of who we are as a people and the people we'd like to become? And the coffee cup collaborative walk, aside from just having access to a decent cup of coffee, also demonstrates the role in which public art can play in the way in which we think about the past, the way we represent the past, and the way we use public spaces to supplement and then extend and go beyond the textbooks that we have to really engage in a very public discussion about the meaning of the past. And so, as you can tell, we're very much influenced by William Faulkner's concept that the past is in the past is not even dead yet. This is his famous, I paraphrase his famous quip. Go ahead, Jackie. Then on day 2, we go to Atlanta. And Atlanta is really where we begin to open our investigation into a couple things. One of which is the multifaceted and complex role religion plays in the civil rights movement in and of itself. We'll stop at the temple, which was a site of early and famous support for the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is also a place that it was visited by extreme violence, as were many synagogues across the South. And we'll begin to look at the role in which the war against segregation was also a war against pro-segregation religion and moral values as well. And then we're also going to go to the Atlanta student movement as well as the Atlanta National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And what is fascinating to me about this is the way in which once we put students and their experiences at the center of our inquiry, it becomes a much more complicated story that we seek to tell. And the Center for Human Rights suggests, among other things, that civil rights may not be the best way to, as we conceive of this trip, or the way we to name the trip as well. And that maybe we want to think about the concept of a freedom movement as opposed to just a civil rights movement. Again, all these things are conversations we'll continue to have throughout the time we're together. The other element that we'll pick up in Atlanta is the international dimension of the movement that we're examining. The Atlanta movement, the Atlanta Museum does a great job of suggesting not only how once we know this history, we're obligated to do something with it, but also examining the way in which this history was always a global history, always global in its dimensions. Go ahead, Jackie. Then on day 3, we're going to end up in Montgomery. And one of the powerful pieces of Montgomery is, once again, we're going to watch the student movement continue to develop across the American South. But we're also going to look at the way in which the student movement in Atlanta, which becomes the headquarters for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, the way in which it explains the rationale for student organization and the student movement to the rest of the world. And what's interesting is actions taken in Greensboro are explained to an eager, I would argue, world in Atlanta, and there's sites specifically commemorating and memorializing that particular moment. And of course, this is also where we'll trace and walk in the footsteps of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as we visit several sites where King is connected directly, and we'll look at the efforts that Atlanta has taken to taking King's complex ideology and just expressing it in the public. There are walls with his tenets of nonviolence. There's his conceptualization, the beloved community. There is the sacred place that contains the burial site for both Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife, Coretta Scott King. And because we are traveling in a non-lockdown COVID moment, we're going to be able to go inside the museums this time. And I would argue that one of those eye-opening things you will discover is the lifelong work of Coretta Scott King as we look at what is called the King National Park. But then we also will travel into, and Jackie, forgive me, I don't know what's on day 4 of the slides opposed to day 3. So I'm just going to chit-chat over Montgomery. And if we skip around on slides, that is perfectly fine. But essentially, when we travel into Montgomery, there is a lot to see in Montgomery. There's the Rosa Parks Museum, and the Rosa Parks that we think we often know from our textbook is not the Rosa Parks that you encounter in this particular site. And you can come, if you've read the book, The Rebellious Life of Miss Rosa Parks, you'll find much of what you've read confirmed and affirmed in this museum. And what I find fascinating is this museum had it sitting there for us to know all this time. And we just simply, as a people, didn't wrap our minds around this version of Rosa Parks and her activism. We're also going to look at the leadership role women as a whole played in the civil rights movement. This is where Joanne Robinson and the Women's Political Action Committee helped launch what became known as the Montgomery bus boycott, and which that catapulted King to fame and to fortune amongst, well, fame at least. And then in Montgomery as well, we're going to spend some time looking at the Equal Justice Initiative and the work that's been done in that capacity. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Equal Justice Initiative, this is once again an effort to take the past and put it in the present, but in a way that reminds us that we're not yet done grappling with the past, and we're not yet done encountering the challenge that Dr. Martin Luther King gave us, which was essentially, how do we create a beloved community? And what is truly militant about the phrase, the content of our character? I think that is a phrase that has become softened over time. And what the Equal Justice Initiative reminds us is that the struggle which brought many people into the streets in Montgomery, Atlanta, and elsewhere, is still an ongoing struggle. And this is one of the interesting themes you'll notice as we walk through all these different places and spaces in this tour, is that these museums end with a unique feeling to them, which is, now that you know, what are you going to do? Now that you've learned, the struggle continues. What's your role in the struggle as it continues? And so there's almost this notion of have you go to these sites to learn, but you also feel like you're getting a baton passed on to you that is asking you, now that you have seen these sites, now that you've immersed yourself in the complexity of this past, what are you going to do with your present, amongst other things? Jackie, or where are we? Oh, okay. And leaving Montgomery, we will zip off to Selma. As you can see from this particular slide, and the way to Selma is part of the Selma-Montgomery trail, which is part of the much larger Civil Rights Trail. But what I find gripping and fascinating is what's in between Selma and Montgomery, and that's the Lowndes County Interpretive Center. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Lowndes County was called Bloody Lowndes at the time because it was a site of horrific violence, but it was also a site of tremendous disempowerment. As nearly none, actually there was a point where there were no African Americans registered to vote in Lowndes County. And Lowndes County is a site in which folks who tried to make changes lost their access to land, lost their access to jobs, and met at where this interpretive center sits and created a tent city and tried to organize collectively against the tremendous economic pressure that was being placed against them. And they tried to create this sort of sense of communal resistance, amongst other things. But what's fascinating, and again, we'll see this more when we get there, is that this is where people first began to hatch the idea of a Black Panther Party. We usually associate that with Oakland, California. But in fact, the image of the Black Panther and the language of Black Power and the language of the Black Panther movement was in fact hatched in Lowndes County out of their response, in fact, to efforts to maintain a sense of racial place and hierarchy, amongst other things. Go ahead, Jackie. Then we're headed into Selma. And in Selma, it is one of the most important, I would argue, experiences that we can have, in large measure because we know of the iconic bridge. And many of us are aware of the role the march from Selma to Montgomery played in winning national voting rights. And so when we go to Selma, we'll meet Joanne Bland, who is one of those souls that just knows how to reach into yours and to make the history that she lived and experienced come alive. And so Joanne Bland will take us on a tour of Selma, but she will also remind us of what it was like to be on that bridge, because she was on that bridge. If my memory serves me correctly, she was the youngest person who was on that bridge on that day. But she also reminds us of what happened before and then again right after that famous moment in which Alabama State Police charged upon the nonviolent demonstrators seeking only to walk from Selma to Montgomery. And she reminds us of what it meant to be in a community that was in the process of struggle, and which this march to Selma became part of a localized struggle, and then what it was like to remain in Selma after the national spotlight had disappeared. And we will walk across that iconic bridge, and I have to tell you, it's one of the most amazing experiences I've had is to walk across that bridge, because you feel as if you are then part of this larger movement, and that's exactly what the National Voting Rights Museum wants you to think. When you hit the other end of the Selma Bridge coming outside of Selma, there's the National Voting Rights Museum, and it is a tiny little place that is jam-packed with a ton of information about both the national and localized efforts to win greater rights for American citizens. Then on the way back, we will, the Live Oak Cemetery and Confederate Memorial Circle, that is part of Joanne Bland's effort to remind us that we are not as a people in agreement as to what the past ought to mean. And so in the midst of Selma, we will visit a privately maintained Confederate Memorial Circle. And the one thing, and I'll use the word love in quotation marks, I love about the Confederate Memorial Circle is it kind of takes your historical breath away, because we describe to, at least I describe to my students all the time, the way in which our debates over monuments and memorials and public spaces and places is part of a much larger struggle of identity. It is laid bare in the Confederate Memorial Circle, in which you see people trying to write and rewrite the history of not only just the Civil War, but then again also of the aftermath of the war in plaques and monuments and signage that were updated as late as 2016 and 2017. And so very much reflecting not old values from the 1950s, but values that are also in circulation today. And I would argue that are playing themselves out in our national political theaters as we speak. On the way back, we will stop at the Luzio Memorial. She was a Detroit housewife who felt so moved by the struggle in Selma that she came down to help, and she was killed by the Klan. And one of the things that we will notice as we walk through this place in space was something that King told his listeners in 1955 during the Montgomery bus boycott in his famous Whole Street Baptist Church speech, is that if you join, you must be ready to die. And I've always been struck by that, clarity of his charge in 1955, when he was just, and I put the word just, talking about boycotting buses. He said, you must be prepared to give your life. As it moved on and to a much larger struggle for freedom, many did give their lives. And we'll see that both in Montgomery at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and then sprinkled throughout Selma, and then again on the journey from Selma to Montgomery. Excuse me. Again, continuing our conversation about the public nature of the way we interpret history and the way we think about the past. And I know that Kate loves this one. So I don't know if Kate, if you want to speak to this very quickly, and I won't put you on the spot, so no is a fine answer. But do you want to talk about Michelle Browder for just a second and this public monument?
Thank you. Michelle Browder is an artist, and you can see her really impressive work right there. And she works with metals and she welds. And so she has created a public art memorial for these young enslaved, they were roughly 14-year-old children who had been enslaved and who had been leased out by the people who believed that they owned these children, and so that a doctor could practice gynecological experiments on their bodies. And so much of what we know about modern gynecology starts because these women's bodies were sacrificed like to this scientific knowledge. And so Michelle wants to honor them. It was one of this trip has so many sites that are just like really transformative, but like to hear the way that she was committing to telling their stories really spoke to me. And the doctor whose name I can't remember right now, that's probably best, right? There's a memorial to him at the state capitol building just down the road from this public art. And I just remember this really strong sense of disgust that he would be honored at the capitol building, in that to honor these women relies on the work of an artist, right? So it's just one of the more catching parts of the trip for me in February.
Thanks, Kate. And Kate's, as always, 100% correct in that there's this monument to J. Marion Sims on the capitals of Montgomery, which is, I would argue, iconic space. And if you're there, you're meant to be honored, along with plaques to Jefferson Davis and other Confederates, as well as monuments and memorials to those who struggled in the Reconstruction era for Black voting rights. So there's this dueling nature about what we remember in the stories we tell. And Michelle Browder seeks to use this public space to try and tell an alternative story. And I think one of the things that we as teachers almost always forget is that the stories we tell are always in competition with other stories, and that students themselves are looking for a way to make sense of their identities, but also our national identity. And how we unpack these stories and how we put them in front of students does a lot to furthering a very careful and judicious understanding of both those journeys, both my own personal identity, but then again, also what does it mean to be an American? Go ahead, Jackie. Then we arrive in Birmingham. And the picture you see there is part of the iconic memorial to the 4 young women who were killed tragically in the 16th Street Baptist Church, which I believe is in the background, but I'm having trouble with the blurriness of that particular site. But it's all part of our effort to try and remember what the movement is called Operation C for confrontation meant to people in Birmingham. And this is the famous picture in a moment in Kelly Ingram Park, in which you watched Bull Connor unleash his tanks and his fire hoses and his dogs, not just on adults, but also on children. And this is the famous moment where King and other strategists, Fred Shuttlesworth included, decided that they would try to flood the jails with the young children of Birmingham to try and make the system creak under the weight of its own legal desires to maintain segregation. And it's these pictures and this confrontation, this Operation C, that worked a transformation in John F. Kennedy and have been captured so wonderfully in various pieces of public art in Kelly Ingram Park in and of itself. And the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, which sits right next to the church and right across the street from Kelly Ingram Park, tells a wonderful, wonderful story about not just Birmingham, but then again, also America's very tortured relationship with race and equity in its own history. And you really come away from this moment. Oh, hold on. We're being live streamed. You really come away from this moment with a notion of what King called, in his words, the Negro Revolution, which was that sense of somebodyness, standing up and talking back to a system that is trying to make you feel like a nobody. And you can see that in the monuments and the sculptures. You can see it in the placards that adorn the streets of Birmingham. Birmingham is famous for being an open air textbook. It has plaques all over it. And you'll see them when we get there, all over the streets of Birmingham, trying to give you a sense of what the people who live the movement, as Ellen referred to earlier, wanted you to learn from this experience. And in Birmingham, you see it better than almost anywhere else. Folks who are part of the movement trying to use public space to tell you over time and space what they hoped you'll get away from this study of the civil rights movement. Then we're headed off to Memphis. Memphis is a powerful place for a couple reasons. One of which is that we are going to be in the spaces and places where Martin Luther King Jr. was when he was assassinated, and will be in the spaces and places when he gave his famous "I have been to a mountaintop" speech. And in the Lorraine Motel Museum, you can stand alongside and adjacent to the balcony and the room. Of course, you can't get to either one, of course, but you can stand alongside those spots, and I'd be hard pressed to say that it doesn't simply take your breath away. What I appreciated most, though, about this particular stop in Memphis was the fact that the museums tell a very similar story of what's called the classical phase of the civil rights movement. But the museum in Memphis begins to complicate it a little bit by looking out and reaching out to the Vietnam War, by looking out and reaching out to the Black Power movement, and beginning to ask us about the extent to which both service in the Vietnam War and the radicalization that resulted from that, and the emergence of the Black Power movement, to what extent that they actually depart from what we consider to be the classical phase of the civil rights movement. So there's a lot on our plates in Memphis, not the least of which is the famous I Am a Man Plaza. These were the signs that were carried by striking sanitation workers in 1968 as they walked down the streets of Memphis. Again, signifying that sense of somebodyness in the face of a system that is designed to teach you that you're a nobody. As I alluded to, we will also be going to Lorraine the Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Hotel. We will also be going to the Stax Museum of American Soul Music. And I think it's important to recognize that the role that music played in the creation of the national civil rights movement, but also the role music played in creating a counterculture of opposition. Every movement culture has a dissenting substance, a dissenting culture that holds it together. And it's important to remember that those who are united in the pursuit of civil rights were held together not just by a common antipathy towards segregation, but also by an affirmation of an alternative world. King called it the beloved community. Folks put a lot of different phrases on it, but the notion was that we were going to create something different than what was. And what the Stax Museum reminds us of that is the cultural component of that we are for a different world, and this is how it sounds, and this is what it says, and this is what we value, amongst other things. Go ahead, Jackie. And then we didn't get to go here yet, Kate, together at least, but the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville will be our final destination. And making that we had to make a hard choice as to whether we would end at Nashville and then sprint to Pittsburgh, or go to Louisville and sprint to Pittsburgh. And we decided to go to Louisville because what the Muhammad Ali Center does in many things, it provides us with an alternative view of Muhammad Ali. It's impossible, I think, to walk out of that museum without having some aspect of your understanding of Muhammad Ali and his person and who he was altered ever so slightly. But the other thing is that one of the things that is just simply not yet done well in the United States, I'll make a bold statement here because I'm probably wrong on some aspect, is we really don't know how to represent and talk about the Black Power and Black nationalist phase of this movement. And what the Ali Center does is it gives us the best opportunity outside of Lowndes County to have a significant conversation and a significant insight into what held the Black Power movement together, what folks wanted to achieve, and someone's coming in, and what the extent to which that Black Power movement, which became synonymous in some respects with Ali, departed from or actually inherited the same stream as the national civil rights movement itself. And then I believe we are returning back to Pittsburgh. And if we've done it right, what Kate and I will manage to conjure before your very eyes is the notion that the civil rights that we're going to investigate is really part of a national conversation. And there'll be materials about Pittsburgh and the extent to which Pittsburgh in and of itself fits into this role. And there's a great reading by a historian named Larry Glasgow, who talks about efforts in Pittsburgh to make what he calls Pittsburgh someplace special. And also Sam Black, who has just this suitcase worth of knowledge about the local struggles in Pittsburgh. He's the author of the famous book Soul Soldiers, which is, I think, the best treatment of African-American participation in the Vietnam War outside of Wallace Terry's famous Bloods. So what I would suggest to you, amongst other things, is that while we're going to go and bus ourselves to places that are far away, the stories that we're going to discover and knit together actually have a very nice home here in Pittsburgh. And I think part of what we'll be able to do is marry what we know about our city of Pittsburgh and the struggles we currently have to what we're going to learn about the past and the struggles that they evoke as well. Ellen?
That is beautiful, Michael. So now we have some time for question and answer, unless Jackie, you had something else that you needed to?
No, I'm good. I'm think everything's
right.
good up to now. We did have a few people who came. Christy came on. And sorry about that. It is being we are recording it, so you can go ahead and listen to it later on the beginning. So
Great, thank you.
And once, as Jackie said, the first rollout of acceptance letters will go out around Thanksgiving. And once you do have acceptance and you've turned back in the required paperwork, we will have a special link on our new website, which will give you access to the resources. So Michael has done an excellent job of creating a resource book for us that has some fantastic hyperlinks to primary source documents. So we'll be using that widely in our study seminar, as well as this itinerary that Michael went over in his fabulous fashion. You, of course, will have access to that as well. So we have those pieces as well. There'll be some logistical paperwork as well. All of those will be linked on our seminar page. So it's a special link that will give you the access code to be able to access that seminar page. You should be able to, Jackie, is that right? Can they all unmute themselves? You should be able to unmute yourselves. I know some of you have traveled with us before, so maybe if you wanted to share your experience in traveling with Classrooms Without Borders, or if you have any questions for our organization, we are happy to answer those now.
That was a great presentation. If I may I ask a question?
Please.
I'm not sure if I missed it, but are there any plans of visiting the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which I think is in Montgomery?
Yes. Yes, I view that as part of EGI's work, since those are they have two museums. One is the National Museum to Peace and Justice. The other is the more sort of standard museum piece. But yes, it's sometimes, for those of you who don't know, that's sometimes referred to as the nation's lynching memorial, amongst other things. And I don't want to give away anything, because I feel like that's something you have to sort of see and walk into and have that full experience and reaction. We'll talk about it somewhat on an intellectual level, but this is such an emotive piece that I just feel like I would be doing a disservice to give it away. But yes, Cephas, we will be there. And if you do teach the crime of lynching in your classes, you can also discover aspects of the people and the names that you have taught there. And there's nothing more powerful than, and I mean, Emmett Till obviously is there, but I mean, going beyond Emmett Till and going back to, you know, the crimes of the 19th century, the crimes of the early 20th century, you can find the people you've studied there. And so it's very, very, very moving and very powerful. So yes, we'll be there. And I regard it as one of the most important places we visit.
Thank you, Cephas. And again, you know,
Thank you.
because we're limited in our time period, we're only going to be gone for those, what is it, 8 or 9 days, Michael? Is it? Oh, it's 7, it's 8 days. So one of the things, and Kate, I'm sure will agree with me, Michael will as well. Last year in February, when we went on the study seminar, one of the comments from our participants was they wish that they had had more time to spend not only at the museum site of EJI, but the memorial site as well. And we will do our best to provide for you the most time that is impactful for you as an educator. But with all of these sites, diving deeper and spending more time, you could spend a week probably at the museum at EJI. It's just so incredibly rich with content. Any other questions? If you haven't filled out the application for the study seminar, I'll drop that here in the chat for you. one of the things that we did notice with applicants is it doesn't really have a good way for you to save your application. So you do kind of have to do it in one sitting, or at least keep your computer open. So that being said, sometimes when I do study seminar applications like this, I try to do it in Word, and then I have my thoughts kind of organized, and then I go back and fill out the application with those thoughts. So that is a good suggestion. Again, Jackie mentioned we got a very generous grant for this study seminar. So initially our cost was, Jackie, $2,100.
I'm not sure that was that was it, but
Well, now it's down to for educators $500. So really quite an incredible amount of learning that is embedded in this, but also the value for that. We're so very thankful to that grant for that. Any other questions?
I had one more question.
Of course, sure, that's what we're here.
It's a request. Michael, would you be willing to share the PowerPoint in put it in the chat as like a downloadable file, or are we going to be sent that at some point?
That's Jackie's PowerPoint, so I'm going to bat that over to Jackie.
Sorry.
Unfortunately, our organizational structure through our Google Drive does not allow us to share it out. I imagine that we can make it available on our seminar page to accepted applicants. So we will investigate how that we can do that. The images, many of the images that you saw were photographs that were taken by Kate, Michael, and some other participants. So on our seminar in February. So we don't have copyright to all of them because they're intellectual property of some of our other participants. But we will certainly be able to share it on our seminar page. That's a great question.
Steve, can I ask you why did you ask?
Not so much for the images, but just I mean, I'm the type of student that I like to look up things beforehand. So just to have the list of the places that were mentioned, I did try to take notes, but just so that I could look them up. So I was more interested in the text part, and that might be covered. I see there's an itinerary on the page. It felt as though it wasn't as detailed as what you were showing, but I could be wrong.
So you know what, Cephas, you'll be pleased to know, I know everybody will, because who wouldn't want to know that there are going to be essential questions that go with every single one of these sites, which we'll give you as well. So we're going to try to structure it to maximize learning. I have a PDF of my own stuff, so we can avoid all the intellectual copyright issues that Ellen raised, that I'd be more than willing to send to somebody. If you want to send your email to, can it be you, Ellen? Or...
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, excuse me. Got choked up over all that. If you want to send your email to Ellen, I'd be more than happy to send it to as a PDF, so it actually transports more easily. That'd be something I'd be more than happy to do.
Fantastic. And for
Yeah.
all of us at our
Thank you. That would be
organization,
great.
our emails are our first name at CWBPGH, so Classrooms Without Borders Pittsburgh, CWBPGH.org. So all of us is our first name and then that URL. So super easy. And if you email seminars@classroomswithoutborders.org or any of the others, they will ultimately get to all of us. As we mentioned, we are a small organization, so there's a little bit of repetitive emails to assure that all of them get answered in a timely fashion. Anybody else? That's a good question, Michael. I'll check on that.
The question I asked is whether Kate and I had emails at the organization as well. I didn't want anybody emailing either one of us and hoping to get a reply and then having it sit in that netherworld thinking I was being mean.
Right. We can work on what that looks like for sure. Yeah, I mean, we can. I'm reluctant always to give out scholars personal emails without their consent. Once we do have our study seminar applicants accepted, once we've begun the first of our pre-seminar meetings, we will have a lot of contacts. We typically open up a WhatsApp group for communication, for important details. That also is something that will become essential when we are actually journeying on the study seminar, because a lot of the day-to-day logistical information gets pushed out through that WhatsApp. So we'll talk all about that. That's to come at a later date. The pre-seminar meetings, that's a great question, Nicole. The pre-seminar meetings will begin in January. Typically, we try to hold them on Sundays, as we mentioned. We know that most of our participants are educators, so holding them during the week tends to be a little bit tricky for most educators. We try our best to look at the Steelers schedule and not schedule things on days where people might have other things that are important to them as well. Is there study time on the bus, or is that downtime? That's a great question. Michael, you might want to talk about what we'll do, because some of those stretches will be quite long that we'll be driving on the bus.
I think that's a collective decision we can make as well. I don't know what the body politic here would like, because sometimes it's great to, if we have 6 hours on our hands, it makes sense to sort of maybe look at an episode of Eyes on the Prize or something along those lines that sets up some aspect of the trip. But maybe for a 2-hour jaunt, people just want time to collect their thoughts and get in them ready for the day. So we can play that by ear. I don't have any problem with having something happen on the bus, but I think it would be something that we'd want to arrive to collectively. That's just my 2 cents.
That's a great answer. And again, we are a community of learners, so we very much know that this is going to be about a conversation with you, with our scholars, with CWB staff. So all of those decisions are not made in a vacuum. You'll always be part of that decision-making process. Unfortunately, there are some things that we can't just deviate from. So our time frame in museum sites, things of that nature, there will, absolutely be people that would have liked to spend more time at certain sites because we have a short period of time, because of course the bus drivers have a certain time period that they can actually work during a day. So all of that does go into play there, but we will do our best to be as flexible as possible in designing this, as well as adhering to the itinerary as it is written as well. Any other questions? So again, I dropped that link to our study seminar page in the chat. And if you haven't done your application, I urge you to do that soon. Also, please invite your fellow educators to join us on this journey. We very much like for this conversation to be not only amongst, different organizations, different educational schools, but also within the school. So if you have 2 educators within the school district, that is an excellent way for you to work on projects across curriculum as well. Jackie, do you want to quickly mention the projects and the witness in the living room piece that we have, or would you like me to do that?
I think I'm going to let you do it, because Rebecca didn't really go over that with me before Perfect. She left, but
so with our study seminars, we do ask that all of our participants sign an agreement that they will do a seminar project, and that project can take many different forms. It could be designing a new curriculum for your school. It could be creating a book of poetry that you've written yourself. It could be any wide number of pieces. But then we also ask that all participants share their experience with a group outside of people that they would see on a regular basis. So maybe not necessarily your department in your school, but maybe in a whole school assembly, or with the social studies department in the middle school if you're a high school teacher, something of that nature. Or maybe you want to share it with community members outside of your school setting. So it can look many different ways, but we ask that you share it, because once you've experienced these study seminars, once you've heard these voices of all of these people who were intimately engaged in this fight for civil rights, you now become a witness. And we hope that it extends beyond your classroom. So we will talk about all of those study requirements after the acceptance round. That will be something that we'll talk about on the first January meeting as well. But that's a great point that we should have talked about. Any other questions? Raise your hands, or either physically or electronically. How many of you have traveled with Classrooms Without Borders in the past? A few. So good. Excellent.
My husband has.
So you're Michael's wife.
Michael's wife.
Fantastic. He came to Poland with us.
Poland, yeah.
That's great.
So he encouraged me to apply for this. So, and he knew it was something I was really interested in. I've been interested in for years and wanted to do. We've been to Montgomery, but we haven't been to a lot of the sites that you have on the itinerary. So
Fantastic. And I think traveling with fellow educators, it also heightens that conversation around the topics as well. Traveling as a tourist is impactful and important, but I think when you travel with fellow educators, you start to look at the history through not only your lens, but through the lens of the other individuals that you're having those conversations with, through the scholars that we travel with as well. And again, CWB does not limit just to social studies educators, language arts educators, art, music, science. If there is some way that you can make this study seminar topic impactful in your school and in your community, maybe you're somebody that works with the diversity, equity, and inclusion program within your school, you certainly can do that. So we're coming up on the hour. Do I have any other questions? No, Elaine had to leave. Michael, do you have any words of wisdom to leave them with?
Oh my gosh, no, I was just going to say thanks. It was great to see everybody. Wisdom was dispensed, I suppose. But it's great to meet everyone, and I'm glad you're on this journey with us. It's just an amazing time.
Absolutely, and it's an important topic for sure in today's world. Absolutely. All right. We look forward to reading your applications if you haven't handed them in, and we look forward to having our committee evaluate those applications as they do come in. Hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Bye, everyone.